A group of journalists who are covering the conflict in Gaza have now written to the Israeli and Egyptian governments asking to be allowed into Gaza so they can report on the conflict properly. While 30,000 Palestinians have been killed in the conflict, no journalists are allowed into the area. That's despite the fact Israel invited journalists to areas that were attacked by Hamas in October last year to report on the suffering of Israelis there. Alex Crawford is a special correspondent for Sky News, one of the people who wrote this letter. Alex, good afternoon to you. What are you asking the Israeli government for? What do you want to be able to do?
We want to be able to get across the border crossings and get into Gaza ourselves. At the moment, the only journalists who've been able to operate inside Gaza have been those journalists who were there on October the 7th. And there's been a very high attrition rate of journalists over that time, as well as of civilians, huge numbers of civilians and fighters killed. We don't know the exact breakdown of those numbers. And we feel to be able to tell the story completely fully and get a fully rounded picture, foreign journalists need to be in. We've seen our Palestinian colleagues carrying the torch for the rest of the journalist world for nearly 5 months now. And you know, Stephen, that when you're covering any big, large news event, and this is one of the biggest, you could possibly argue, throughout the world, it certainly had a very big destabilizing effect just in the region alone, never mind what's happening in Gaza and Israel. You normally rotate news teams through the story. I mean, even if you were covering the Olympics or the South African elections, you'd have a number of teams that would be covering all different angles of the story. Well, our Palestinian journalist colleagues, those inside Gaza at the moment, have been doing it all on their own for nearly 5 months. And we feel it's overdue, way overdue, for foreign journalists to be allowed in to help bolster and support what they're doing on the ground.
There are all sorts of things to this. I mean, I've found as a journalist when people say to me, Stephen, what you're saying isn't true or that didn't happen, the most powerful phrase in response is to say, I was there. In this case, no one can say that.
There is absolutely no substitute for being on the ground as a journalist and seeing it for yourself. And as I say, without those journalists already inside Gaza, we would, as a world, be completely blind without them. But there is a vacuum of information, and unfortunately that is being exploited for political reasons, and therefore foreign journalists also need to be on the ground to bolster and support those journalists already there. They've been heavily degraded, not just in numbers because of the high number of journalists who have died inside Gaza, but they're on a daily basis faced with what everyone else in Gaza is faced with, the daily struggles to survive. They've also lost family. They've lost homes. In large cases, they're spending the day trying to find food and water. And I know myself and all those journalists on that list who are some of the most experienced war correspondents and presenters throughout the world, certainly in Britain and this side of the world. You know what it's like when you're covering huge events. I mean, I've been in Ukraine for the past couple of years covering it. You only need to spend a couple of days sleeping on the floor without access to washing facilities or real food or substantial food or water to feel really, really degraded and debilitated. We feel now it's time, more than overdue. There's been multiple attempts over the past nearly 5 months to try and get inside Gaza, and each time it's failed. We sent a combined letter just before Christmas in about November with the BBC, ITN, all the key broadcasters before Christmas signed that letter. It got absolutely nowhere. The Foreign Press Association of Israel took it to the Supreme Court of Israel to appeal against the Israeli military's decision not to allow foreign journalists in there, and it was rejected by the Supreme Court on the grounds that they agreed with the IDF, the Israeli military, that the journalists might compromise security on the ground for the Israeli soldiers. Now, whilst foreign journalists and all those journalists worldwide who want to get in and see things for ourselves, there are going to be suspicion, confusion and doubt about exactly what's going on in Gaza. There's been accusations, very serious accusations of war crimes, more serious allegation of genocide in there. Whilst worldwide journalists are unable to corroborate that, those suspicions are going to increase. This is a chance for the Israeli military to allow foreign journalists in, give them unfettered access so that those allegations can either be proved or disproved. And whilst they can't be by worldwide journalists, then those suspicions, confusions and doubts will continue.
You're very careful in your letter. You start off by saying that you're non-partisan. The problem, of course, is, and let me sort of be the one to say it, is that you have to ask why Israel would let people see one side of this conflict and not the other. I mean, why they would say, why their military would be so clear to say that journalists can't go into Gaza to see what's happening.
Well, because they don't say that overtly. They say that there are security concerns on the ground, and even our most recent interview with one of the spokespeople from the IDF insisted that there was abundant access. So that is clearly not true. And with all due respect to the IDF, there is not abundant access. The only access is from journalists already there. Journalists that they keep on insisting are not independent, that are coerced by Hamas, who are unable, the IDF is asserting this, who are unable to give complete, unvarnished, accurate facts. Well, let the rest of us in then. And as I say, there have been multiple attempts by individuals collectively throughout the journalist industry, throughout the world, trying to get in, and none of them have been able to get in. Going in with the IDF as an embed has severe restrictions. All embedding with all militaries have severe restrictions, and I've done it multiple times, British, American, French troops all over the world. They have restrictions. You are a guest of the military, and they determine the route that you take, where you go, and whether or if you're able to talk to anyone whilst you're there. Now, under the IDF embed restrictions, they review whatever footage you take, and none of the embedded journalists have been able to speak to any Palestinian civilians. Now, that clearly restricts giving an entire picture of what's going on the ground in Gaza.
Alex Crawford, thank you. Good to hear from you again. A special correspondent at Sky News, someone, of course, who spent a lot of time covering South Africa as well.